5 signs your CPA or tax firm is working against you and making you think they're working for you. First sign number 1, if they believe anything other than the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. How can you find this out? Simply ask them. Say, what is the supreme law of the land? Is it the Constitution or federal law? If they say anything other than the Constitution, you know that they do not have your best interest at hand. Here's why. Because it is well established through Supreme Court hearings and the entire establishment of the Constitution and law in general, that the supreme law of the land is the Constitution. This federal governments and the state governments and local governments they have to operate within the parameters stated and given within the Constitution. Anything outside of those parameters is unconstitutional and therefore illegal and therefore is not subject to be obeyed. And again, if they say anything other than the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, if they try to give a caveat or try to add some extra stuff other than just a flat out the Constitution, you know they do not have your best interest at hand. Second sign your CPA or tax firm is working against you instead of working for you and making you think they are is if they understand the term inclusio unios est exclusio alterios. This is a Latin term which, believe me, they are familiar with. And you can ask them, have you ever heard or are familiar with the term inclusio unios est exclusio alterios? And here's what that means. It's a doctrine that is expressed in Black's tax law, which is universally accepted as the standard. And here's what that actually means. It means the designation of one person is the absolute exclusion of all others. And here's what that actually means. It's a doctrine that decrees that where in tax law an express situation is described of where the tax law is applied, and that means then an irrefutable inference must be made that what was excluded or omitted was intended to be omitted or excluded. And here's what that means in simpler terms, is that basically where a tax law says it applies to a specific situation, it only applies to that specific situation and automatically can be assumed and drawn the conclusion that it does not apply to everything else that was excluded from that example. And this is important because we're going to see in a minute how that applies to the tax law and to the different definitions, which we're going to talk about in just a second. So the second sign that your CPA or tax firm is working against you instead of for you is if they say that they don't know, they've never heard of the term inclusio unios est exclusio alterios, or if they ask you, how did you hear about that? How did you find out about that? Where did you learn that from? That's a very clear sign that they are familiar. And again, all CPAs, all tax attorneys have to learn this as they go through their education. So if they say they don't know it, then it's an absolute flat out lie. And if they ask you how you learned about it, that means that they are already aware that the tax law has been being misapplied, and yet nonetheless, they still offer to help you file taxes that you don't, under any legal obligation, any legal reason have the obligation to fulfill, which means, again, they are working for the federal government, they're working for the government and not for you. So that's the second sign that your CPA is not working for you, but against you, right? Is if they express that they do not know that, or they ask you how you know that term. And then the third sign that you can tell if your CPA is working against you is if you ask them, is if they recognize that the custom tax, if they don't recognize that the tax law has custom definitions. And here's what that means. You can ask them, does the tax law have custom definitions? Use words with custom definitions. If they say anything other than a simple yes, then you know that they do not have your best interest at hand, because if they say no, they are lying to you. And if they say yes, but this, that, or the other, then they're giving you a half truth and not painting the whole picture. Because here's the reality. The tax law has over 50 words that have custom definitions. Now here's the next part. Then here's the fourth sign to know if your CPA is working against you or not. Ask them if those words with custom definitions are used in the definitions of other words. And the answer to that is absolutely yes. If they say anything other than yes, understand that they're not giving you the whole truth and they're trying to deceive you in some way, and so they're working for the government and they do not have your best interest at hand. Now, before I continue, I'm going to give you 3 examples of those custom definitions that I believe are going to be really helpful. And I believe these are the 3 most important words to understand, because they're going to help you understand how the tax law has been misapplied. And again, I want to bring to memory the fact that that term inclusio unios est exclusio alterios, meaning the designation of a specific person is the absolute exclusion of all others. because you're going to need to understand that with these definitions, okay? So the custom definition for wages, which again can be found in subsection 34 of Title 26, subsection 3401, definition A, is payments in exchange for officers, employees, and elected officials of the government of the United States of America. Again, let me say this again. Officers, employees, and elected officials of the United States of America. That's three categories of service towards one person, one thing, which is the United States. So again, it could be said like the following. It could say officers of the United States of America, employees of the United States of America, or elected officials of the United States of America. And it's important to understand that because remember, earlier, again, drawing on that Black's Law definition, that doctrine of inclusio unios es exclusio alterios, right? Meaning the designation of one person is the absolute exclusion of all others. So if you are not in these three examples of public office if you're not in these three examples, then your wages or your earnings do not qualify as wages according to the tax law, and therefore are not taxable. Right now, one thing I want to add to here is to this definition of wages is that it also includes officer also includes officers of corporations. Now, within that, I have to be specific again. Corporations in this context of the tax law speaks specifically of government-owned corporations like Fannie and Freddie Mae, like Amtrak, like USPS. These are corporations that the government owns the majority share. If you are an officer in any one of these companies, then your income is absolutely, or at least the income tied to that activity, is absolutely taxable. Okay, so let me take a pause real quick and make sure I clarify this. Federal income tax is absolutely constitutional when applied correctly. Okay, however, since the 1940s, the IRS has misapplied the tax law, and that is where we are today. And so now I'm giving you this information so that you can free yourself from the misapplication of the tax law. Okay, so that's the first word. The second word we're going to talk about as far as custom definitions is the word employee. Okay, and again, you can find this definition in tax code USC 26 subsection 3401 definition C. And the definition for employee according to tax code and tax law and in the use of tax law is specifically officers, employees, and elected officials of the United States of America. Again, we see that those same category of people, right? These are people who are holding public office or who operate in some capacity directly with or contract with the United States government, whether it's a federal level, whether it's a state level, or whether it's local. So again, these tax laws apply only to these specific types of people and these specific types of categories. If you are not doing these activities, then by law, your revenue is untaxable. Okay. So now let's look at the third word that I want to share with you real quick for the custom definitions. And this is, you can find this is, we're talking about the term business and trade, or trade and business. And you can find this definition in tax code 626 USC 26 subsection 7701 definition C. And this is the definition of trade or business according to tax law. And this is the definition. Every time you see the word business or trade in the tax law, this is what that word actually means. And so, according to tax law, the definition of trade and business is the performance of the function of public office. Period. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Again, business or trade, according to tax law, is the performance of the functions of public office. If you do not hold a public office, you are not, again, according to tax law, you are not in business. Now, outside of tax law, in the common use definition of business, enterprise, commerce, corporations, we're in the marketplace where you're adding value to marketplace to receive value. You can be earning revenue all you want. You could be making millions and billions of dollars. But if you are not holding the function, or you're not performing the function of public office, you, according to tax law, are not in business. Okay, it's very important to make that distinction between the two: tax law, which is the custom definition for the word business, and then the common use definition, which is used outside of tax law. The common use definition of business is never used in the tax law. Only the custom definition is used in the tax law. So keep that in mind. So again, Sign number 4, your CPA or tax firm is working against you, is if they do not acknowledge and they cannot define for you custom definitions from the tax law and how they apply. And particularly, if they can't give you these 3 custom definitions directly, straight the way I did, and can't and give you tell you where it's located in the tax law, you can do a Google search for those frames. That's why I gave them to you. You can Google search USC 26 SS 3401 and you'll see point A, definition A, and it'll give you the definition for wages, etc., for what we just did. And I'm going to give you a worksheet actually in just a moment. I'm going to give you access to be able to get the worksheet to be able to ask yourself to have this information for when you go to talk to your CPA or tax firm. Now, the 5th sign that your CPA or tax firm is working against you and not for you is if they understand or they don't understand or they say anything other than that the income tax is an excise tax. Okay, so again, I want to establish the following, which is that the income tax, federal income tax, is absolutely constitutional when applied correctly. Correct application means it is an excise tax. What is an excise tax? It's a tax placed on privileged activity. Well, what is privileged activity? A privileged activity is something that in order to do it, in order to exercise, you have to get government authority, which is like holding public office, right? So again, judges, senators, president, vice president, mayors, House senators, etc. Anything that has to do with a public office is